Hello, everyone. Let me stop this music. Hello, everyone. Hello, my awesome vegan people, my awesome vegan followers, my awesome vegan supporters. So today we have a very special guest. She is a vegan educator. She is a TEDx speaker. She's an animal rights activist. She hosts the Science is Great podcast. She co-founded the International Vegan Earth Day March. And yes, I had to write all of this down because she has done a lot. So needless to say, she's a very successful person. Right now, she is traveling the country in her vegan van, giving lectures and workshops on sustainable living. So that is awesome. And yes, she is vegan, but she does not share the one regret that all of us vegans have, right? And that is going vegan sooner. And that is because she was born and she has lived her whole life vegan. So without further ado, please welcome Sarina Farb.
Hello,
Hi,
thank
Sarina.
you for having me on.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to have you on. You know, I was very intrigued for the first time when I saw your channel. I'm like, whoa, this person was born vegan. I haven't met anybody like that, I'll be honest. So I have a lot of questions regarding that. I also have a lot of questions regarding activism and yeah.
Yeah,
But you know, before I dive into all of these questions, I like to ask a couple of icebreaker questions just to get the ball rolling a little bit. So, okay, well, are you, let's see, coffee person versus tea? Coffee versus tea?
depends on the day and the week and how much caffeine I'm trying to avoid.
Okay. So you do both.
Yeah,
Nice. Okay. Sweetened or unsweetened?
sweetened.
Sweetened. Nice. With the sugar or with artificial?
Like organic cane sugar or maple syrup.
Oh, nice. Maple syrup is a good one. And what's your go-to tea, by the way? What is your nice tea?
Green tea. If I'm skipping the caffeine, I'm doing the green tea.
Wait,
It
but
has a
is that
little. It
skipping
has a
the?
little of caffeine. If I'm trying to minimize my coffee intake.
Yeah, exactly. Let me put on the banners. I see the banners are not there. There you go. The banners are not there. Okay, that's nice. Okay. Yeah, I'm a tea person. I don't really drink coffee, but I get it. If you drink both, that's pretty cool. Um, uh, how many speeding tickets have you gotten your whole life? I'm guessing with a van, you
None, actually. Yeah, none, zero.
none. Oh, okay, that's impressive. No speeding tickets. Okay. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Probably Taylor Swift, something like "We're Never Getting Back Together."
I don't know if I know that one, but I like Taylor Swift, so I'll agree. That's awesome. That's an awesome song. That's everything she does is awesome anyway. So
It's really good for karaoke because they're catchy and easy to sing to lyrics.
yeah, true. It's also she's got that nice melodic background music always, like, well, not background, but like nice melody to all her songs. Okay, and what is a show that you have watched lately that you have found binge worthy and maybe you would recommend it to people?
Ooh, Bridgerton most recently. Just watched the third season of that just came out like last week.
Oh, I have seen it on Netflix. I haven't watched it myself, but that's interesting. Okay, that's cool. What is it about, by the way? Is it like
It's like a period drama set in like the Regency era in England, but it's kind of an alternate universe too. So it's not exactly historically accurate, but still has, the Queen and
I see.
debuts and romance and dramas and coming of age and it's really well done and I think really well acted.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, maybe I should give it a watch. Is it? I think I watched a little bit of The Crown. Is it similar to that?
Probably. I haven't seen much of that, but yeah, similar era, I would think.
Okay, okay, nice. Okay, well, let's get into this thing. I mean, by the way, I gave you an introduction. Would you like to introduce yourself or complete what I have said before?
I think you did great. You covered the general stuff, and probably just yeah, better to get into the questions and see where it goes.
Nice, nice. Okay. Do you have like I wrote down a couple of questions. I hope they make sense because I had wrote them in no particular order, and I wrote them down as I was like ever since I talked to you, I started writing down some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, something came to mind. I'll ask some questions. Okay. So do you have or can you describe your earliest memories related to being vegan? Is there something that
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I have a lot of those. So yeah, I was raised vegan, and my mom was also a vegan educator and animal rights activist. And she really wanted to lay the foundation for why we were doing what we were doing as a family. So it wasn't just a diet or a health trend or something like that. And so from literally my very earliest ages, we were constantly talking about veganism. You know, simple things such as like, we love animals, we don't eat them. Cow's milk is for baby cows. And she would kind of quiz me and play like little games around this. So I can remember like, you know, eating like a veggie burger or something, and her going, "What is your veggie burger made of?" You know, I'm like 4 or 5 years old, and I would be like, "It's made of veggies." And she'd be like, "Now your friends eat burgers at school. Is yours different than theirs?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And she'd be like, "Why is it different?" And I'd be like, "Well, theirs is made of animals. Mine's made of veggies." And she'd be like, "And why?" And I'd say, "Well, because we love animals. We don't eat them." You know, so we kind of played these games. And I grew up vegan in Kansas in the Midwest, which is not the most vegan friendly area. And so I think she kind of, you know, wanted to make it really clear and make sure I knew the whys behind what we were doing and why I was different and things like that. So it was constant conversations like that when I was really little. And I remember she would even quiz, like I had a younger sister who's 4 years younger than me, and she'd be breastfeeding her and would, you know, quiz her even when she was like 1.5 or 2 years old. My sister would like want a nurse, and she'd be like, "What kind of milk do you want? Do you want giraffe's milk?" "No." "Oh, giraffe's milk is for baby giraffes." "Oh, do you want dog's milk?" "Oh, no, that's for puppies." "Oh, you want mommy's milk?" You know, and like she would kind of do stuff like that again when my sister was like 1 or 2 years old to really set that foundation. And it was very age appropriate language, but it made perfect sense to me as a kid. So yeah, we were constantly talking about veganism in our house.
Oh, that's really cool. And what was it just your mom that was vegan, or was your dad also vegan, or was he in the picture? I don't know.
Yeah, my dad's also vegan. But when they met, my dad was like a meat and they both were born and raised in Kansas. My dad was a meat and potatoes guy, and my mom had worked in the pharmaceutical industry, which is what turned her vegan. She firsthand saw inside of pig farms, chicken hatcheries, and animal testing labs. And so when my parents got married, my mom knew even then that she wanted to raise any future kids they had vegan. And my dad agreed to do that, but was not vegan himself yet. But by the time I was like 6 months to a year old, he was also vegan. But my mom's really the activist and the driver of veganism in our family.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. And like, did they ever give you an option to not be vegan? Like, I know they taught you, but like, did they ever say like you can choose whatever you want or something like that? Or
Yeah. So a little bit. When I was about 7 years old, they did what they called giving me my own food choices. But I think it's important to distinguish, like they never said, "Oh, you don't have to be vegan anymore." They never phrased it like that. Instead, they phrased it as, and they chose 7 because that's when I had finally learned to read. And so and I kind of homeschooled when I was younger too. And so part of homeschooling was I had this stack of flashcards that my mom made up that had like 40 common food ingredients, things like casein, whey, gelatin, things that you'd read on a label that wouldn't be vegan in an otherwise, vegan product. And so one side of the flashcard would have the ingredient, gelatin, and then the other side would have a description of what it was and how it was made and like why we didn't eat it. And
wow, that's interesting.
Once I had learned and memorized all 40 of these flashcards, that was when my parents basically said, they were like, up until this point, we as your parents have made educated, informed food choices for you. And so they didn't make it about veganism. Some of the flashcards were also things we didn't eat, like red dye 40 or artificial colors and flavors for health reasons. There were some health things, some sustainability things, and then ethical reasons mixed in as well with all these ingredients. And so it was framed as, up until this point, we as your parents have read labels and determined what's healthy, sustainable, ethical, etc. We've made educated food choices for you. Now that you can read and you've learned these flashcards and all these ingredients and why we don't eat them, now it's up to you to read labels on your own and make informed food choices for yourself. But that was only when I was out of the home and at school or with friends. It was always like they were always clear, our home is always still going to be vegan. We're still going to buy and choose the food we, serve you for dinner and things like that. It's not like you can be like, oh, I want to eat this instead. Buy this for me. It was, if a friend offers you a snack, it's now up to you to read the label and decide if you want to accept it versus coming to us. And so I got my own food choices when I was 7, but because again, they'd educated me and I knew, I had no interest in doing anything differently and never wanted to try animal products of any kind.
So, and I imagine that you had a lot of interaction with your parents as a young, and veganism sort of seemed normal to you. Like it just seemed like a normal thing. And do you remember your first interaction or the first time you found out that people don't actually do this? Or have your parents told you that most people don't do this, or why they don't do this?
Yeah, I don't remember the first time, because even though it was normal in our family, we did live in Kansas. And so I had lots of friends and grandparents and other people around that definitely were not vegan.
Yeah.
So it was around me a lot when I was younger. So I don't remember the first time it came up, but I do remember once I was old enough or able to really be aware that, we were different and other people were eating animals, and asking my parents kind of why. I remember that their kind of explanation was, well, we're educated. We know these things. Not everyone knows, what happens to animals. Not everyone knows where their food comes from. And that's really one of the first things that kind of made me an activist, because it was like, well, then if I tell people, they'll want to stop eating animals too. So, I can remember shortly after I'd gotten my own food choices, I was in competitive gymnastics. And we regularly got like these goodie bags at our competitions that were full of candy and other things. And so I'd go through them, reading the label myself, and then handing out all the non-vegan candy to my teammates. And I remember this one girl looking at something I'd handed her and gone like, well, why can't you eat this? And I was like, well, I can. I choose not to.
Oh, that's a good response.
Yeah. And then she was, and that was after, again, I had my own food choices. And so then she was like, okay, so why do you choose not to? And I took it back and I was like, well, that one has, gelatin. Do you know what gelatin is? And she's like, no. And so then I proceeded to describe in graphic detail what gelatin was and how it's made. And I remember thinking, like, obviously she's not going to eat it now because I've just told her what's in it. And she looked at me and she was like, oh, whatever. And then popped the candy in her mouth. And I remember just being so stunned of like, I thought people did this because they didn't know any better. And once I tell them, how can they still want to do this? So, it made sense for a while as a very young child, and that was how I conceptualized things. But the older I got, the harder it was to stay naive and think that information was the only barrier to change.
That's very interesting. That's and did you like, because you started mentioning these social situations, and in these social situations, have you had like any difficulties because you were vegan? Like, aside from obviously the food choices, I'm guessing that if you went to kids' parties or stuff like that, you would have to be careful about what you had, and other parents, I guess, had to be careful of providing something for you. But like, did you have any difficulties within the social groups where kids mean to you because of it or stuff? Like, I don't know, by the way, like, you don't have to answer any of these if you feel uncomfortable about it or something. I'm just curious because,
Yeah.
it's something that I strive for. Like, it's something that I think all vegans want from their children, right? So it's interesting to hear stories about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that happened, and it's hard for me to say exactly what was going on because I was a very naive child. And so I know there were a number of situations around bullying and things that happened when I was younger. But I say I know about them because my parents witnessed them, and I was so naive that I actually didn't even realize I was being bullied and have no memory of this. It's things that my parents have told me of, like, yeah, I was really concerned. I saw what these kids were saying and doing, but you were so oblivious and didn't notice. So we didn't, make a big deal out of it. And some of it was around veganism, and some of it, like, I was just a pretty weird kid that did my own thing. And so, I think some of the bullying was because I wore clothes that didn't fit in, and I just kind of did my own thing. But I do know that, and I also homeschooled for a lot of my childhood too. And so that, I think, kept me out of some situations where things could have been more difficult. But in 6th grade, I was attending a Montessori school. And that was where a lot of things arose in different ways, difficulties with the teacher, difficulties with some of the students. But a lot of it, I kind of think I brought on myself because, again, I was going around and telling people, like, we would be sitting at the lunch table and I would bring graphic vegan flyers with me. And as kids were like eating a hamburger or a meatloaf, I would literally open up flyers in their face being like, did you know a hamburger comes from a dead cow? Look, here's a cow being skinned. And like, did you know this is how this got to your plate? So it's also hard to say how much of what I received was from just being vegan and how much was because I was actively being an activist in people's faces in a very aggressive manner. So like, I joke that in that particular school, like, half of the class went vegetarian and the other class hated me. So, you win some, you lose some. And I remember then they went on a fishing trip too. And I, with the help of my parents, got the fishing trip stopped the year I was there. And one girl who had gone vegetarian, but then was really mad about this catch and release fishing excursion being stopped, came at me one day and was like, I'm not going to be vegetarian anymore because you got the fishing trip stopped, like as though she was punishing me. And I was like, okay, like, you're hurting the animals, not me. And I, and then even in high school, when I was attending a public school, I actually had issues almost with teachers more than I did peers at times. Like, my teacher in 6th grade gave me a really hard time, tried to ban me from talking about veganism, tried to force me to wash dishes that had meat on them as part of chores. And we had a lot of struggles there. And then I did competitive debate in high school and spent a lot of time in the evenings and weekends with the debate team. And, I can remember, like, I would bring my dinner with me sometimes when I was staying after school to practice. And, my teacher had a microwave in her office and I'd go to heat it up. And she would always make comments like, ew, did you heat your vegan food up again? Like, that smells so weird. You always stink up my office when you bring your food. Just like, what? Yeah, like, really, you're the teacher and you're like, it's a good thing I didn't take things very self-consciously or wasn't more bothered, because that easily, looking back, could have created a situation that allowed students to bully me or, cause issues.
She said that in front of the students.
Yeah, she'd make those comments in front of our whole team during practice and
Jesus.
stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that was, looking back, and in many other ways, she was a fantastic coach who I adored. But like looking back, the way she treated my veganism and food, I actually think was very problematic. And I did end up arguing about it a lot. I mean, we were debaters, so we argued about everything. But yeah, like I got into lots of arguments with other students about that. And, mostly I was able to handle it pretty good naturedly. I didn't take things too personally. But again, that was me. I think a different student in those environments that wasn't always kind of out there putting information out and bringing on debates could have felt very uncomfortable. But that's why, yeah, it's hard to say what occurred simply because I was vegan and what occurred because I was in people's faces about it.
But that's awesome, that you were an active, because one of my questions was actually, when did you start doing activism? But it seems like you started doing activism your whole life. It's just natural to you. It fell into your hand. And like with friends, like when you had friends, were your friends vegan, or were you able to be friends with non-vegan people, or how was that to you?
Yeah, most of my friends were not vegan growing up. Really early on, when I homeschooled, we did have some other like vegetarian homeschooling families. And at that level, like we'd do a lot that we'd host at our house, or people in our group, that the default food was at least vegetarian, if not vegan. So that felt pretty decent. And my parents did a good job, like, sent with either friends' parents making vegan stuff at birthday parties or sending me with food. But especially the older I got, most of my friends, a few of them were vegetarian or vegan. But then when I got to high school, none of them were. I didn't even know another I think I knew one other vegetarian in my entire high school, and didn't even know of anybody who was vegan at that time. But I did have vegan friends from a distance that I met at like vegan conferences, other kids that were also being raised vegan. And one particular conference, Vegan Summerfest, that I attended every single year growing up, I met some of the best friends of my life at that conference. And staying in touch with those people, seeing them once a year and then being able to call them on the phone and discuss issues and things that went on was very grounding and very helpful. To have that, because most of the immediate people surrounding me in my life were not. Even through college, that was largely true. And it was a kind of constant struggle of like, oh, am I going to lose friends or piss people off if I say too much? Like it's been something that I have struggled to navigate for a long time.
Oh, I think I can relate to that. I think we all relate to that, in a sense of how much to say, how much to not say. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's I saw this thing that keeps bringing up, you should have a show about your life. It's a very interesting. Axel says legit needs a TV show about her. Yeah, I agree. It's very interesting. It's and we haven't even haven't even gotten, like, I think you have so many good stories probably of this whole thing. Well, how were the choices, by the way, when you grew up? Because I imagine when you grew up, there weren't as many choices as there are nowadays, right? So
definitely not.
Yeah, so at some point you did have to do this on your own, not your parents cooking or something for you. And did you feel like any difficulty when that started happening, or?
Well, my mom joked that it was actually easier to be a healthy vegan when I was growing up because she did most of, our cooking from scratch. I didn't really grow up ever going out to eat, hardly ever. There weren't many vegan restaurants around. There weren't many options. There was still, you go into a restaurant and you say we're vegan and people go, vegan? What's that? Like people didn't even know the word as much. And there definitely weren't as many, there were still some, but they were fewer and far between. So my mom cooked a lot and I learned how to cook pretty decently from her. And I was never really a picky child growing up at all. I've always eaten a wide variety of everything. And so that's definitely been helpful. Like, even now, if I get lazy and I need quick fast food, I open a can of beans or chickpeas and like eat them plain. And that like tastes good to me. Not saying it tastes amazing, but it's, I can do stuff like that. But in college, part of the reason I chose the college I did was because they already had an existing whole vegan bar in the dining hall. And so I really liked going somewhere that I knew, and they had a salad bar, they had rice, and then like two main dishes and a soup, I think, pretty much, and a vegan dessert at every single meal in college. And so I really liked that I knew at least there would be options and I would be able to eat no problem with that.
Oh, that's pretty cool. When was that? When did you go to college? Like, do you remember the year? I'm just curious.
Yeah, 2012 to 2016.
2012. Oh, okay. I assume there were way more options.
Little more recent. In high school, I always just brought my own lunch. Like and that's mostly the way I grew up and the way I've done things. I just never even assumed or would try to eat out when traveling on road trips. Or it was always, when my family would go on trips, we'd bring 2 giant coolers in the back seat filled with, pre-cooked, food and meals and everything. And so I've learned how to do that for myself. And so either I've been in like a college campus or dining hall where there were vegan options, or I've been in a place with a kitchen where I've been able to cook my own food.
Okay. And like throughout all of this, did you ever feel like you're missing out or something? Like, did you ever feel like you're curious about anything else other than being? And I don't mean just food right now. Like, I also mean like, because I suppose that you didn't go to zoos, you didn't do any of this, right? So were you ever curious about any of these activities or food? I don't know.
No, I mean, I've definitely never wanted to try any animal products. And, so I actually used to teach high school, and some of my students asked me this question, and I think I shocked them with the way I answered it, which was to ask them, you've never tried dog or cat. Do you feel like you're missing out?
Oh, that's a good response. That's a very good response.
And they were, horrified. And I was like, that's how I feel. Like, if people ask me if I'm missing out on cow or pig or chicken. In terms of other experiences, I mean, I also grew up attending protests and activism with my mom. So like I went to my first circus protest when I was 10. And we would leaflet college campuses and table and give out food samples. I grew up doing all of that stuff too. But no, I wouldn't say I feel like I've missed out on anything else either. Like, and I think I did go in 6th grade with my 6th grade class. I think we went to this trip in Chicago and went to maybe the Chicago Zoo or something. And I think it was kind of like a dilemma, and we talked about it. And my parents were like, we're not obviously paying for this. And I think it was free. Like nobody had to pay to enter the zoo. And so they were like, if you want to skip out and avoid this, we can help you do that. If you'd rather just go along with your classmates and see it. And my teachers were not the most supportive or helpful. And it was kind of like they didn't do a great job providing alternatives. Yeah. And I think I might have attended the zoo in that case. And all I remember was like feeling sad, and not wanting to pay for that again. And I didn't pay for it. But yeah, it was like I went because it was free. So I didn't feel like I was, supporting it. My parents weren't paying for it. But I think I just looked at the animals and just felt sad and was like, yeah, I don't like, this isn't fun. I don't want to see this again. And so no, haven't felt like I am missing out on stuff like that.
Yeah, by the way, the reason why I ask you these questions is not like I think we all vegans know we're not missing out on anything, but it's good to ask just in case non-vegans are watching.
Yeah, and I have no problem with you asking, and that the answer wasn't for you. That was, for people who might be listening, like, or aren't
That's awesome
vegan.
answer, by the way. Awesome answer. Yeah, awesome answer. Did you have any like cultural or traditional events that were challenging when you grew up? Like, I assume that because your parents were vegan, not a lot, but there were probably events where you would meet with the whole family and stuff. Was that ever difficult? And I don't just mean like food wise, but rather like also, were you ever surrounded by non-vegan food or people who weren't vegan or people talking about vegan, and did it feel weird to you being around that or frustrating?
Definitely, absolutely. I mean, our extended family has always been a struggle, and my family is Jewish, and there's lots of, things we've gotten together for. And, I wasn't really raised super religiously, but I also grew up knowing that was a piece of why we didn't go to or attend synagogue or more events, even things like Passover. Especially because I can remember my mom, and it made sense to me, especially the older I got, but, she was like, I don't want to sit at a table where we're celebrating freedom and like there's a dead body of an enslaved being on that table. Same goes for like Thanksgiving and some traditional American holidays. And so like with Thanksgiving, we always hosted a vegan Thanksgiving that we would invite my aunts and uncles and grandparents to. And while my grandparents were alive, they would all attend. And then once my grandparents passed, my aunts and uncles stopped attending. And some of them have said things like, oh, I want to, got to have, like, they can't go one meal without a turkey, or they go out of their way. It would be like, well, we're going to get together and eat a turkey first before we come to your house. And, we just stuff like that. So yeah. And then other family reunions and events, people wouldn't want all the food to be vegan. And my mom and I wouldn't want to, sit at the same table. So we'd be like, well, we'll come after dinner and join everyone. And yeah, definitely been a lot of difficulties there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I'm like, it sounds like yeah, it's honestly, it's interesting because it sounds like exactly the life that we all of us vegans live. It's an easy life if it weren't for the non-vegans, basically.
Yeah.
So, and I'm curious because I assume that your parents taught you one definition of veganism and one way that you see animals as vegans. And I have more questions about that, but has that definition or has your view on veganism changed as you grew up over the years, or the definition that you have now? Have you have you shared the knowledge that you gained maybe with your parents and mutated this definition ever so slightly, or have you from the start been taught that it's about like being against animal slavery or stuff like I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was always told it was about, not hurting animals. It was kind of this basic idea of like, if we can live a happy and healthy life without hurting and killing animals, why not do so? And that's what veganism is. Like, I always knew it was ethics and not just a diet, but also, both just myself personally and also how I think most children's brains work. I was not super like intellectual at a really young age. I was not reading definition, it was, so I wasn't, I couldn't recite, I can recite the definition to you now, but I couldn't. So it was like, I knew, but I wasn't out there like obsessed about philosophy. I wasn't reading animal rights theory as a kid. It was just, it was just how we lived and what we did. But then once I was probably about halfway through college and kind of getting a lot more intellectual in college and then in my own life, I started becoming very interested in going deeper into that and reading all of these books and different animal rights philosophers, philosophy in general, but also animal rights theory, different definitions and blogs. And I got really deep into that and kind of trying to come up with my own philosophical views of things. So in that sense, yes, my understanding of the definition of veganism evolved, but really, I don't feel like it did change that much. It just became more sophisticated and intellectual, based in, being able to reference things and stuff I had read versus just a child's idea.
So it was more about like filling some holes rather than completing the definition or anything. It was more like getting into the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how do you feel about pets, like, growing up? Like, I know this is a topic in the vegan community that's a difficult topic, but I'm curious because since you grew up with this, I'm sure maybe you have a different view on it or something. How do you feel about that?
So yeah, we did have a number of rescued animals, cats, dogs, guinea pigs, turkeys, and geese at one point, all rescues. And that was, I think I grew up with a pretty generic mentality of like spay and neuter your animals, rescue, adopt, don't shop. And that was, kind of the basics that I grew up with. And again, I think more of my ideas around pets became more sophisticated when I was reading philosophy and theory for myself, trying to figure out what I think. And so where, I guess more my views now are, I fundamentally think that the institution of pet ownership is wrong. And that we should not in any capacity be breeding animals into existence, any domesticated animals into existence solely for human purposes. So even if every animal in every shelter had been adopted, and then someone was like, great, can I go buy a dog from a breeder? I'd say, no, we should not be breeding them. But, of course, that said, I feel like, and this is a conversation that I don't like to have with non-vegans, for example, I feel like it's besides the point. It's so theoretical and out in the future. It's like, the reality is there are millions of animals in shelters that need homes. And I absolutely think if we have the capacity and ability to give them a home and take care of them, we should do so. And in that capacity, I do still support spay and neuter campaigns, even though in an ideal world, I also think that is a violation of their bodily autonomy. But it's like in the imperfect non-vegan world we live in, that's a pragmatic decision that I support.
Yeah, I get that. That's a very good response. Basically, what you're saying is that as long as you adopt and you take care of them, you kind of have to, you're okay with it, but you somehow have to follow the rules of society. It's for the better of you and your pet companion, right? You don't have to be the owner, but you have to behave like the owner. Am I making sense? I don't know. Interesting. It's interesting because so far, like, I feel like the views don't differ that much, right? Where you were born vegan versus people becoming vegan. So it's interesting. Did you feel like growing up, growing up as a vegan, have you noticed any differences within your activism? Like, has your activism been different toward, because I'm assuming you also hang around more activists and stuff. Like, have you seen any difference, any advantage maybe or disadvantage from you growing up vegan?
Yes. The two things that come to mind are, one, I think I have years worth of experience that many people don't. And I'm like, I want anybody to be an activist that wants to, but I also see people jump in sometimes. And I do not believe that any and all activism is good and effective activism. I'm grateful that people are standing up and doing things. And I think we need a wide variety of tactics, but I also think educating ourselves, learning what does and doesn't always seem to work or be more effective. And so in particular, where I see this difference is, I think growing up non-vegan, having to be friends with, if I wanted friends, with non-vegans, has given me a very high tolerance for being connected with people that don't share my opinion on everything. And I think in some ways for outreach, for talking to people, for having positive conversations. I think that can be helpful, because sometimes I see new vegans or new activists jump in very angry and just like, you know, with this attitude of like, I didn't know this. Now that I know this, obviously I'm changing. So again, that same attitude I had as a kid of like, if I tell this information to my friend or parent, they're obviously going to change. And if they don't, they're a horrible, terrible person. And so I sort of feel like, you know, some of the stuff that I've seen, I think I have a higher tolerance for being able to see that, like, and I think it's important to focus on people's actions versus who they are as a person. So I can call out and say, you're being a hypocrite. You are supporting animal abuse. You are paying for animal abuse. But I don't think that makes you an animal abuser. I'm not going to call you names, because I think in the reality of our society, and this, you know, this depends on context too, right? Like, I think there's a difference if we're talking about trophy hunting and things like that, because those are not so culturally normal that we're all desensitized to it. But something as normal as eating animals that every single person around us is doing, I do think it's unfair to call every single person that eats animals a bad person. I think their choice to eat animals, their actions are harmful. But I think some of that comes from the fact that, yeah, I had to grow up my entire life thinking that these people in front of me were supporting something I thought was so terrible. And I still was able to find the good in them and be friends with them and, you know, see that they weren't terrible people themselves, but had been conditioned and brainwashed by their parents and society to participate in this system.
That's interesting. So in a sense, what you're saying is that you didn't have the frustration of dealing with non-vegans because you dealt with non-vegans your whole life, basically, right?
I still have the frustration, definitely. But yes, having that frustration your entire life also, I think, yeah, helps me make peace with it a little bit more and be like, well, yep, this is the sad reality of the world.
And that's an interesting thing. I saw somebody make a comment right here, also Axel. So he said, I disagree with her slightly on this. I was introduced into veganism from somebody who portrayed veganism terribly. And actually, this got me questioning one thing. Maybe I'll ask you, what do you think about it? Because do you think that people, that it matters how people get introduced to veganism, in a sense that, or is it that some people are just genuinely more curious and more open towards new ideas? And that really gets them, like, to some people, maybe just yelling the word vegan, well, not that easy, but like just a minimal amount of information gets them to look more and go vegan. And to some other people, you need to just hand them over everything basically on a silver platter. Do you think, like, between these two types of people, it matters how we do the activism? Or
I
how do you feel about that?
Different types of activism reach different people. So yeah, so I mean, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be nice and friendly and that there's no place for, you know, I mean, like I've done everything from tabling to storming stores and disruptions to, you know, like don't get me wrong, like I think there's a wide variety of activism, and it's hard to know exactly what is going to get us to the world we want. And different things do reach different people. Like I've argued with people over the use of graphic footage. I love doing cubes of truth on the street with holding TVs. And I know people that are like, I don't want to traumatize people. We shouldn't use footage, and, you know, or like, oh, it desensitizes people. People won't do it. And it's like, I can clearly see when I'm on the street doing that, some people will walk past, don't care. That's not the thing that's going to reach them. Maybe they need to be shamed or yelled at or something. And other people it does reach. So I do think different types of activism reach different people. But on a deeper level, I also think that most people, like, there's a whole lead up to what like some people obviously seem to make the connection at a very young age, and for whatever reason are born into a family, a life with a personality where they just get it, and they're, you know, crying when they learn that they're eating an animal on their plate at 5 years old, and they're trying to go vegan their whole life. And there are other people who it takes, you know, who honestly are never going to go vegan. There are people I know in my life who I don't think they're ever going to go vegan in their lifetime or mine. But I also think that for a lot of people, it takes a series of conditions. So I think this is true even of a lot of people's adults who do say like, well, I went vegan overnight. You know, I watched one thing and that was it. And I think, but we don't know what seeds were planted before then. Like maybe they saw the word vegan on a billboard, because there's some psychological research that suggests it takes about like something like 7 coats of paint to paint a fence, is the idea that like it takes 7 times hearing something for the message to really sink in. And so I think it's possible, even when you look at some people and you're like, well, they went vegan overnight from that footage or something, and these people didn't. Well, because maybe for that person, that was their 7th exposure. Maybe they have a niece who's vegan. Maybe they saw the word vegan on a billboard. Maybe they met this, you know, dog that they fell, you know, it's like all these little things. And so that they weren't conscious of. And so to them, it was, boom, this thing happened, I went vegan. But maybe that other person that sees that footage and doesn't go vegan, that's their first exposure to it. And so maybe it's going to take, you know, lots of other things. And then you mix that in with different things that reach different people. Some people, like I've heard all kinds of wild, you know, vegan stories, like someone that went vegan. I don't know if you know the comic Vegan Sidekick.
I don't know that one. Interesting.
They have a page and they make these memes. They've been very prolific over the years. And I know someone who literally saw a meme, like a comic that someone shared that was kind of making fun of meat eaters, and like that turned them vegan. So I know people that have gone vegan from that, from footage, people that are like, oh, you know, someone talked nasty to me and, you know, I wouldn't go vegan for years. And then like, there's the whole range of stuff that I think turns people vegan and reaches different people. And it can take a number of exposures and things priming people for those experiences.
Very interesting. So, do you think that, because you said 7 coats of paint, right? And I also agree with you that I believe that to some people, some types of outreaches are better than to other people. Do you think when you talk about the 7 coats of paint that if a person receives 5 of not the type that they need and 2 of the type that they need, they will still get it? And of course, I don't mean like 7 is the number or something. I know it's kind of like an arbitrary limit or not limit, but average, let's say. But do you think that those other 5, the question is, do you think those other 5s are effective, even if they're not the type of activism that these people require?
I don't know, honestly. I haven't I haven't gotten that deep. I don't know what the literature says, or if there even is an answer to that. I think it's really hard to even try and answer questions like that, because not only are we still relatively small and new as a movement, but it's like we're going up against such a huge thing. We're so small, and it's really hard to do studies, to even figure out like what is it that's actually changed. You know, it's hard to look back at previous social justice movements, and we can look back now and be like, well, I think this was that event that was this turning point here, and this was, but like, do we really know? Honestly, like, it's really hard to say exactly what changes. And this is also unique from all other social justice movements in that most of the other historical movements involved people advocating for themselves in some capacity, and didn't involve the rest of society actively participating in their exploitation 3 times every single day. So it's just, I think we're kind of guessing, and it's, you know, we try stuff, we look, we make the best, you know, choices we can right now, and hope it's working.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it too. But like, I gotta wonder, because I'm sure you have your own conversations with people where the people feel, I don't know, medium. Like you don't know if you got to them, you don't know if it was okay or not, or and I gotta wonder that was that wasted time for me. And I don't mean like wasted time in the sense that I would gladly still do it, but like, would my time have been better served if I had just said no to these people and move on to the next people?
Gotcha.
You see what I mean? Like,
yes.
Is the question, like, I'm wondering, like, if we want to get more people, because I think at some point, right, if we get enough vegan people, it just starts trickling down because people influence other people, because there's so many more other choices and so on and so forth. So should we approach activism in a sense where we plant more seeds horizontally, getting people to each of them to grow a little bit, or should we plant them more vertically where we get more and more people closer or vegan directly?
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. My thoughts on that are, one, I think when it comes to activism, knowing, like, distinguishing for yourself or for, your action or event, what your goal is and what you're trying to do or reach in that moment. So outreach where you're turning people vegan is very different than a pressure campaign and a disruption of like a store where you're not trying to turn people vegan. And I do think that is where a lot of confusion comes in, where people are like, some people were in a restaurant and angry and yelling like, that's not going to turn anyone vegan. They're making vegans look bad. And it's like, well, the goal of that action isn't to get people to go vegan. The goal of that disruption is part of a strategic pressure campaign to pressure that restaurant corporation to take foie gras off their menu, or these other kinds of strategic policy changes. And so I do think that is the first thing, is to say, what is our goal here today with this action or this campaign? So then that will help you figure out what strategies and what, is good or acceptable for that approach, because they call for very different things. What is going to be effective to turn people in the moment in front of you vegan? And this is true even, I'd say, of a lot of the viral videos of like debates and street conversations. I think sometimes the benefit of those is those are really, really good as online content that goes viral and may turn people that are compelled by those arguments online vegan. But is that effective for turning the person in that debate that you're discussing things with actually vegan? Those are two different, and again, I'm not saying one's good or bad, but like, you should be clear on what is my purpose with this action. And that will really help bring clarity. So like for me, I do a lot of different stuff, but I am an educator at heart, and I do like the outreach and conversations and trying to turn people vegan. But even with that, like when I do, street outreach with TVs and stuff, I am looking for a very specific person that I want to have a conversation with. I do not actually, to me, it is a waste of time in that moment if I talk to the wrong people. So like, and I can tell, that's why like we have, policies of like, if people walk past us and don't stop and look at the footage, we don't engage with them. Because if I'm calling out to people or yelling things like, hey, come look at this, and I'm sort of forcing people over, those often will end up in pointless debates where we go round in circles and people aren't being authentic and honest. And I don't like, and I still say, maybe I'm planting a seed, but from my experience, the most effective conversations I have when we're doing TV outreach are the people who have never seen that footage before, walk up, are horrified by it, clearly emotional, and deeply bothered by what they're seeing, and willing to engage in an honest conversation. And so when I'm like, teaching new activists like how I do things, I am a big proponent of know when to walk away from a conversation. Like some people like to debate and argue for the sake of debating. And again, if we were recording all these conversations and putting them online, that might be different, because that's going to have but when we're not doing that and we are trying to use our time effectively to reach people, you can easily get caught up in an hour-long debate with someone that is not honestly open-minded in that moment to what you're saying. Yeah, maybe hopefully it's planting a seed they'll think about in the future, but like that hour could maybe better be spent having 10 different conversations with other people who are like teary-eyed and sad about what they're witnessing and willing to really consider and think about what I'm saying. So I do think it is good and it's very obvious from what I've done. There are people that are ready, that particular type of activism, they are ready to be moved and are open by it. And there are people who are absolutely not. And so, sure, hopefully it's planting seeds too, but I'm going to try and wisely use my time to reach the most people who I think are the low-hanging fruit for that form of activism.
That's a very interesting thing that you say. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a very good one. And you're basically, yeah, you're taking the people that are open, which is a good one. But like, you know, I like to sit with the sign and I wait for people to come and talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, absolutely always, when I sit with that sign, there's a large population. I go and sit in places where there's a lot of people passing by. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe amongst the 20, 30, 40 people, one stops, right? So that's 1 in 40 people. And I can't help but wonder, like, okay, but how can I get all of the other 40 people somehow interested in this, or somehow at least not necessarily have conversations with them, but at least introduce them into it, right? So that they maybe
Mm-hmm.
look further into it. So like, I feel like individual outreach, like we do it, is very much vertically done, right? Where we go to each person individually, but horizontally, I think we need more horizontal, like at least doing outreach. That's how I feel, because of this thing that a lot of people don't stop, a lot of people don't talk. Well, they don't know it's about veganism, by the way, is the sign that I says it's a social experiment. So I'm curious about, yeah, like how do you feel like we should approach this more horizontally, like more to get more people interested in veganism, or more interested in veganism?
I think it takes everything on so many different levels. And I don't know that there's one right answer. One of the things I will say is that from some of the social change research I've looked at, there's this idea of a tipping point, that we don't actually need a majority of the population to hold a belief to, change things. So it's like, I don't operate from a place of thinking we need 50% of the population or more to go vegan to actually change things. I look at some of this research that suggests we really only need, the estimates range between like 10 to 25% of the population to strongly hold a belief. It's still a lot before it creates this tipping point where, so it's basically suggesting that change isn't always linear. It's not like, oh, more vegans, fewer animals harmed, it's like, it can look like there's no change. You reach this tipping point, boom, society changes, just like that. And what was normal becomes, not, or vice versa. And so where this comes out for me is I am fairly critical in some ways. I still absolutely think it has its place and I support it. But I'm a little bit more critical of like reducitarian initiatives, particularly on the outreach level of like, telling people, oh, well, eat less meat. Because I look at this and I'm like, if we were successful in that effort from an outreach perspective, let's say we got 80% of the world eating, 50% less meat, we could look at that and be like, oh, the number of animals killed, eaten and killed would be like way, way, way less compared to like if we got 10% of the population to go vegan. We should work on getting 80% of the population to, reduce their meat or whatever. But I say, if none of those 80% of people have fundamentally shifted how they view animals and whether or not they think it's okay to use and exploit them, then that is not actually as far as a positive step in the direction I want to go. And I'd rather see 10% of the population that are strongly ethical vegans, because to me, that makes us closer to a tipping point of a paradigm shift where we no longer view animals as objects to exploit. So that's, again, personally the way I operate from, and I'm still grateful to the people out there that are, working to change menus and reduce people's consumption and things like that. But for me personally, I approach things of like thinking about it in terms of this paradigm shift. So this is true when I'm doing outreach and I'm talking to people. I'm not necessarily trying to get them to walk away and say like, I'm going vegan today. Like that would be great, but like, who knows if I even believe them. I'm looking for, have I gotten them thinking? Have I challenged their beliefs about what they're participating in? Have I shown them that they are living out of alignment with values of peace and justice that they say they hold? And I think switching that paradigm is what will help switch things in society on a systemic level much faster. But, you know, policy changes, changing the farm bill, like there's so many different angles we can come at this from. And I think all of those together are needed to help do that. We need the outreach and education. We need the policy changes. We need the default veg policies in universities and campuses and institutions. We need to get rid of subsidies for the meat and dairy industry so the prices of meat and dairy are higher, you know, all of that. I think all of that together is really important to help radically shift things.
It's a very interesting perspective because I actually had that question myself, and I think you're the first person to actually answer it in a way that it made me get a good perspective on it. And you're right, maybe getting people to understand the idea, even if let's say you would get 80% of the people to reduce to one, let's say they eat once per week, you would still have this mentality that it would be hard to shift, and shifting the mentality would be far more important than them being vegan, or than them, reducing or consuming less animal products. But in that sense, I'm curious, does that mean that if people choose to understand, like you'll have conversations with people on the street and they understand the perspective, they're like, yeah, I get it, but I can't do it, or I can't change, or something like that. Do you think that those people don't actually fundamentally understand the perspective, or do you think that they understand it and have trouble changing because of, I don't know, commitment issues or change or something like that? Like, and in that case, like if you think that they did understand the issue, do you think that they are included in these 10 to 20%, or?
It's a good question. Sometimes I think people agree just to end a conversation, and they're not.
That's also true.
You know, like I've seen that people will just try to be consistent, and they'll be like, okay, fine, you're right, I'm a hypocrite, I abuse animals, like whatever. And I don't feel like they're super genuine. They're just like trying to sort of get out of the conversation, win the, you know, argument, whatever. But if there is someone genuinely that's like, you know, you're right, I agree, I can't do this. I actually have two people personally in my life, the people that I've stayed friends with from high school and college, who were not vegan, but were those type of people who were always like, you're right, and were genuine about it, you know. And like, I just, you know, and the first person, like, we were in high school at the time. She's like, I live at home. I don't like, this is, you know, really hard, but like, you know, the arguments you're making, you're right. Like, I agree that you're ethically right. And both of these people are vegan today. So I think people that really do genuinely agree and are not just saying that to get out of a conversation or make themselves feel better or whatever, I think they are likely to be future vegans, and it is a matter of time and helping them learn how to overcome those barriers. It's hard to assess in a, you know, 10-minute conversation on the street or something, but with people that we know better in our personal lives, like that's kind of the way I am now. Like these are the people that I've stayed friends with. And it's like, even when I was surrounded by all non-vegan friends, I would have rather been friends with someone that was like, yes, I agree, you're ethically right, it's difficult for me, I'm not there yet, than someone that's like, no, you're wrong, there's nothing wrong with eating animals. This, you know, like, because at least one of them, it feels like we have the same morals. But in a society where the other system is so normalized, and that's where I'm understanding, I guess, is like, you know, when I was saying before, it's like, I understand that, you know, we live in such a system of normalized violence that is normalized with most people from such a young age. There is serious cultural conditioning that we have to break through. And for some people, it does take time. And, you know, not that like I don't think that there's an excuse to eat animals, but at the same time, I also think there is the reality of psychology and how people change and living in this society. And it's, it's like I go back and forth on the question of like, is it really difficult to go vegan or not? And sometimes I'm of the opinion of like, well, no, like that's stupid. Of course it's not if you put yourself in the animal's shoes. If you think about, like, if you're saying it's difficult, then you're thinking about you. And if you think about the animals, then obviously it's not. And at the same time, the reality is most people are selfish. Most people are thinking about themselves first. And from that perspective, I can understand it can seem like a hurdle. And so I don't always think it's helpful to just be like, dismiss people's concerns. And if they're genuine in agreeing with us, that it's better to be supportive and be like, okay, so what are your difficulties? And I understand you feel like it's difficult to learn new ways of doing things or changing your habits, etc. Like, let me be supportive and help you in that. So I lost my train of thought where this original question came from, but
no, I understand your perspective, but like as you were saying this, I'm also questioning. Like, do you think, because you do go to universities, do you go also to high schools and hold speeches?
I've been to some high schools. I prefer universities, but yeah.
So do you think like would it be more well, not more effective? Okay, it's not about being more effective because it's not necessarily the thing, but like, do you think it's important? How important, let me phrase it this way, how important do you think it is that we reach children and just to get that conditioning erased, even if they don't become vegan, the kids, but at least they have that opening, that gate where maybe later on they do become vegan?
Yeah. I definitely think that's very important. But I will also say that part of the reason I prefer universities to high schools is because it's a much, much harder fine line to walk when you're talking to minors. And I prefer to talk to people that are legally over the age of 18 and adults, because then I don't feel like there's any kind of it's like I believe that they are capable of making these choices. And obviously people are in different circumstances, but it's a little bit more of a fine line. You get a lot more pushback from parents and teachers and administrators. It's a lot harder to get into high schools and say what you want to say unabashedly too. But I also think, it's a fine line that I had to navigate as a high school teacher myself, of like, if you are like, part of me, of course, is like, if you're a minor and you want to go vegan, like, screw your parents and do it anyway, even if they're telling you not to. But also, as a teacher, there is a power dynamic. As a teacher in a position of power, I also can't really be out there telling students under me, like, oh, your parents are forbidding this. Oh, ignore them and do it anyway. And also, it's like, it's a lot harder. And the conditioning starts very, very young. I can remember I substitute taught in a preschool, or I was not substitute. I was just teaching in a preschool for a couple years. And the owner of the preschool actually was vegan, and all the snacks provided were vegan, but the kids brought their own lunch to school and ate it. And I'd sit at the lunch table with these kids, and they're like 3, 4, 5 years old, very inquisitive, and they love to play games of like, ask who else was doing things similar to them. So someone would be like, I love hot dogs. Who else likes hot dogs? Raise your hand. And I would intentionally not raise my hand when the kids would ask about something, and they'd be like, why not? Why don't you like hot dogs? They're delicious. And I would say back to them, I'd be like, oh, I don't eat animals. And they'd be like, it's not an animal, it's a hot dog. And or like, what do you mean it's an, and I'd be like, oh, well, hot dogs are made of pig. And again, like, I'm literally just stating factual truth that is very often hidden from these children by their parents and euphemisms in society. But I can remember And some of these kids, one of them tried to go vegetarian and her parents got very upset at me.
Really?
Yes. Well, they were more upset and it wasn't me. It was actually a non-Christian child in the classroom who ruined Santa Claus for her something, but I got blamed for that too. They were more upset about her finding out that Santa Claus wasn't real than trying to go vegetarian. But she did, and my name came up. It was like, where did you learn about this? And she was like, well, Sarina doesn't eat animals. So like even at 4, 5, and 6 years old, when the kids learn the truth, many of them are very compassionate and inquisitive and want to. But I also see the conditioning, because I remember one little 4-year-old boy going, oh, we need meat for protein and strong bones. 4 years old. And he's like already making a muscle and saying this, and it's like, well,
Wow.
he must be hearing that from his parents. And that's what, so it's like, I do think we definitely need to be changing the conditioning in the schools in terms of, the nutrition programs, the curriculums, like the things that are taught in the schools. But it's also like we have to break it generationally through vegans and stuff too, because when you have parents that are still saying and teaching and repeating these things to their kids, that's incredibly powerful to children. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of vegans that still have a lot of this propaganda unconsciously embedded in their heads. And I think, not to get fully into it, but that's part of some of the ex-vegan stuff that happens. But a really good example of this is, so my mom, when she chose to raise us vegan, she started getting all these books, and there weren't that many at that time, but she started diving into the medical literature herself, like reading some of the studies that existed at the time, learning about the China study and Dean Ornish's work and reversing, all these things, because she really wanted to make sure she was doing not just what she believed was best for the animals and the planet, but for her own children. And so she did all this research. She fully believed and was convinced that it wasn't just healthy, but healthier to raise children vegan. And she didn't believe cow's milk was necessary. So, all of this. Very educated. Yet she still tells this story. When I was about 1 year old, she and my dad were like holding me by my arms and like swinging me back and forth as they were like walking up some stairs or something. And all of a sudden I like screamed out in pain and like grabbed my shoulder, and like I wouldn't stop crying, and it seemed like something was really wrong. And my mom's told me her immediate thought was, oh my God, she has weak bones because we haven't fed her cow's milk. We just broke her arm. So it's like, even though she's done all of this research and is certain that it's healthier, and I think that shows you the power of a socially conditioned norm like this. When doctors, medical professionals, TV, parents, family members, friends, when everything, and people don't realize, they're still like, oh, vegans are pushing it's like, we are still such a minority. These overarching vast majority of the undertones of conditioning in society still very, very much support eating animal products, even though the data and science does not. The conditioning does. And so it's like, if someone is educated and certain as my mom could immediately have that concern and thought pop into her head. And she ended up taking me to the chiropractor, doctor, whoever, and they were like, oh, that's nursemaid's elbow. It's really common. You're not supposed to swing, kids under a certain age by their arms. And he like popped it back into the place. No, broken bone or anything. But, again, that's where her head went. And so I think that's so important for people to realize that, like, we need to become aware of our own unconscious biases that are still there. And even when we go vegan and change, I think many people that are eating a plant-based diet, even that are living vegan for ethical reasons, can still unconsciously be harboring a lot of the conditioning that's around them that they were raised in. And I think we need to call that out. People need to be aware and realize that, so that they don't fall prey to these unconscious feelings and beliefs.
Yeah, that's a very good one. Yeah. I understand your perspective. It's interesting. Do you ever find you never had yourself concerns like that, right? Have you ever had concerns?
I have not. That's a difference between my mom and I. Like, she even though she knows all this, she, even to this day, I think, still occasionally has these thoughts. Not me. I have never once been like, maybe if I ate some flesh or milk or something, that does not pop into my head ever.
Did you get infuriated at the commercials of animal products and stuff like that, who they explain, like, even as a young child, did you ever have that frustration with the society or media that's portraying it in a certain way?
We didn't really watch TV or movies, so
okay.
I got to avoid a lot of that.
That's good. Yeah, I have more questions for you, but I know you can't stay for long. So I'm also curious about the van life. Are you still living your van life?
I am not doing that full time. I still have the van and I take it out for trips when I go on speaking tours, but I am not living in it full time. That was not mentally sustainable for me.
I was curious about that, yeah, because it always seemed like such a hard thing to do. Not because of vegan, just because it's hard to do, to be in a van all the time. Interesting. Okay, and where are you in Kansas now, or are you in like California, or you're still in Kansas? Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm in Kansas City, and yeah, I needed a kitchen and a fridge and a bathroom, all things that van life did not provide me. So I'm much happier living in a house with those things now.
That's cool. Well, at least you still have the van. That's also awesome.
Yeah.
So anytime, when you go on a trip now, do you just take the van and never book anything, or do you still?
Yeah, pretty much. I just spent 3 weeks in California in May doing a bunch of activism and speaking, and I just took my van with me and stayed in it along the way and with people, and yeah, it makes traveling really easy in that way.
That's cool. Okay, well, I want to ask you, how do you feel, how do you see the future of veganism, maybe for younger generations especially? Like, do you see it as something that, like, how would you not how would you envision, I also have that question, but like that's later. Like, how would you see the future of the movement going forward? Like, do you see it growing, and how? And maybe do you see a tipping point where we're like, bam, we're done, we just goes on its own?
Good question. I don't know. I have a lot
Lab-grown
of
meat.
Oh,
A lot of people think that's a tipping point. That's why I'm curious. I'm also curious.
Definitely not what I think. I have a lot of very strong controversial opinions on that one.
No, go for that. I like that, because a lot of people feel the same, by the way, like you. So
yeah, no, if it would, great, but I definitely do not think lab-grown meat is going to be some major tipping point. I don't think, for several reasons. One, I don't think technology and the free market ever solve social injustices and moral issues. Even when we think they do, I think often we're being naive. Even just as an example, like, I hear people point to the invention of like cars as like, oh, well, we stopped, using horses for, pulling carriages for transportation when we had cars, and this is taken at face value. It's like, oh, technology better helped, animals. But it's like, did the invention of cars and roads really improve the world for animals? Like, maybe for a few horses, but there's still plenty of communities that still ride horses, and for entertainment in cities. Like, because technology doesn't fundamentally change those underlying speciesist beliefs. Two, look at all the animals that get hit on all the roads and highways across the country now because of our, cars. And I'm not saying like that it's just like, I think it's reductionist to think that this technological switch out of the invention of the car somehow magically saved a bunch of animals or was going to be a tipping point. And so I think looking to any kind of market solution or technology, and I think we see that even a little bit with, some of the conversations around Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, like that people were, really excited. It's like, oh, these are the most realistic. And I'm very glad they exist. I'm glad that they hopefully help some people. But without the education, without people knowing why they're changing, there isn't a huge impetus to change. And then we see like, oh, well, it was a trend. A bunch of people were just eating them for a little while. Now the sales are down. It's like, from a social injustice perspective, the market and technology are not going to solve an injustice. We need the activism and the education for that. And so, and that's one of the problems that I have with lab-grown meat, is that it is fundamentally different than plant-based meats like Beyond, because it actually upholds speciesism. A lot of people don't realize that the way they're making them right now, they're still actively taking biopsies and flesh samples from animals to create these cell culture lines. And, and I hear the same argument of like, well, it's a little bit. If we can make thousands of burgers from, taking flesh from one cow, we're going to save a lot of animals. Well, great, but that's not fundamentally challenging the idea that animals are ours to use. That's still saying, well, if we can make this food product from using some of their skin, that like we should do it. And there's some science on sustainability. And like I've worked in labs growing cell cultures before. I grew breast cancer cells in a lab for a couple of years.
Interesting.
And just from like a scientific standpoint, I think it is very naive to think that this is going to be a productive, cost-effective, magical, sustainable solution. I'll be pleasantly surprised, but I think even if we overcome all the scientific and technological hurdles and it becomes, cost competitive or really successful, I think it still easily could be a trend, something that becomes a little bit more normal, gets incorporated in. We have blended products. We have some lab-grown meat with, real meat. I've heard people talking about that. I just don't see that it's going to be a magic bullet or tipping point. I think it's more the attitudes and views in society. And again, I can't say exactly what that will be, but I think it's, subsidies and policies, I think really are a huge thing, as is education, as is some of the, personhood laws and open rescue legal challenges. I think all of those, they're all important. I don't know that any of them is a magic bullet, though.
Maybe your life story becoming a show is a magic bullet. I don't know. Getting people to see that, hey, it's normal. Well, why is it? Because I feel like some people see veganism as this. I mean, a lot of people call it extreme. The reality is just normal life. What do you mean? I live the same as everybody. I live the same as I did before, and I assume you live the same as I do. You just eat, but you avoid the products that exploit animals. It's not that difficult. So.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you see a positive trend from, well, I assume from when you started growing up until now, you have seen a positive trend, but like, especially lately in the last 10 years, have you seen a positive trend in the whole vegan movement?
Definitely. I feel conflicted with answering this because, and it might be the headspace I'm in right now, but I also definitely see some things that I am critical of and that I feel like are holding us back right now.
Say it.
I don't like to, but I feel fairly frustrated with some aspects of the movement right now. I think so much division, so much cancel culture.
True.
And I think we are kind of getting off track and shooting ourselves in the foot with some of that stuff. And I see some of the like inability to tolerate differences of opinions and have conversations with people that we differ from coming out very strongly. And and the reality is, like, I've watched this over the years. It feels like it's also kind of normal for this movement and other social movements. Like, there's always going to be conflicts and splits and disagreements. but you know, and I've seen, it's always been something different over, you know, like my life. I can point to like, oh, this was the big controversy then. Oh, it was this. Oh, it was this. But it also feels like the polarization and level of cancel culture and treatment of other people that we disagree with has become normalized to a new level that I think is hurting things immensely right now.
I wonder if you're open to saying one issue that you think is polarizing. No, we don't have to discuss that issue. I'm just curious if you have that one. Like, because I agree with you. Like, I feel like we should be able to discuss and, well, at least discuss something we disagree on, right? I mean, I don't know if it's the culling predators thing that some people have, or the even lab grown. There's opinions left and right about it, right? So I think we should. It's discussing it. So it's good for us. It's good for everybody. We grasp more out of it. And I think we should be open to it, but yeah, we shouldn't call people non-vegans because they have a different opinion to us, right? That's in the same cancel culture that you mean, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, an example that comes to mind over the last few years was COVID. Like, that's, yes, it's related. And at the same time, it's like whether you agree or disagree with the government's actions or personally got the vaccine or not really shouldn't affect our ability to work together to spread veganism or speak up for the animals. And the unfortunate reality is it was hugely, hugely divisive to a very, very extreme level, where people having a different opinion that was not mainstream or you know, not supported by a lot of people got people entirely excluded and canceled. And I've seen, and that's one of the biggest ones that comes to mind. But it's that type of stuff. I've seen it with politics too. And again, there's some people that find that I know strongly disagree with me. That's kind of, there's this attitude popping up of like, you know, veganism is not just, it's like it becomes about all these other things. So it's like, you're not vegan if you voted for this person. You're not vegan if you don't agree on this issue and this world issue and this war and this you know, all of these other things.
Yeah.
And it's like, on the one hand, I absolutely agree that like we do need to be holistic and inclusive, and like we cannot allow or have, you know, like racism and sexism in our activism. Like, that is problematic, and we're not going to win freedom for animals by oppressing and putting other people down. But I also think extrapolating from that to the political level and social level, where we're canceling people because they did or didn't get like a shot from big pharma, and then we're going, and that's not over like whether you care about social justice. It's like, well, if you didn't get it, then you don't believe in science, and then you voted for this person, and then you're this. It's like this whole extrapolation where we're kind of creating a picture and then going, this person doesn't belong in our movement because they hold all of these other views. And it's like, what is this helping?
Yeah, it doesn't help anyone.
So yeah, and that's actually newer. Like, I used to, over the years, my views have evolved, and I used to be much more on the sort of veganism is inherently a leftist social justice ideology that goes with all of these other ideologies. And I feel like now I've kind of started to see some of the harm and some of that getting taken too far, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, then are we trying to convince people to not just stop hurting and eating animals, but then also agree with us on every political issue? And I don't think that's going to happen. And I still want everyone to stop exploiting and eating animals. And if someone has a different political perspective than I do, and they are still upset by what happens to animals and want to stop eating them and speak up for them, I want their support in that. And I want to be able to work with them in that. And I don't think it's helpful to say like, you're not welcome in the movement because we voted for different people.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Yeah.
So I have lots of controversial views in here.
I don't think that's a controversial view. I mean, even Leon says we should make it clear that veganism is only about the animals. Something not being in line with vegan ethics, but not being about non-human animals shouldn't take one's vegan label away. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. We shouldn't be like, veganism is about non-human animals and not exploiting them and trying to dismantle this whole fucking system. But I mean, that's maybe vegan activism, not veganism itself. But yeah, but like, we shouldn't be. I think maybe we should target people who claim they're vegan but they're plant-based. How do you feel about that? Should those people remove their vegan card when they're just plant-based for the, I don't know, for the environment or for food or stuff like that?
You know, I mean, I used to be very into guarding the word and label vegan, and definitely would have felt that way. I feel like it's, you know, I'm not going to say it's semantics because it's not, but also there's a part of me that feels like some of that is a distraction now. Like,
interesting.
Like, yes, I agree. If you're eating plant-based and not, you know, don't understand the ethics, you're not vegan. But I'm also not going to go out of my way to tell or debate someone I know who is eating plant-based and be like, I just don't feel like it serves a lot to go around, be like, with anyone, like, oh, you're not vegan. Oh, you did. Oh, you know, and like, I've seen people do it, you know, they feed their cats and dogs, you know, they feed their cats vegan cat food, and they get called, oh, you're not really vegan, you know, or they take a medication and they're like, oh, you took, you know, and it's like, I'm just like, what is this helping? If we want to have a friendly conversation one-on-one to educate those people, great. But like, just going around labeling and telling people you aren't vegan, I'm like, I'd rather spend my time getting people to stop eating animals than like arguing with people about whether they can call themselves vegan or not. That's, yeah.
I think the concern, at least the people that I talked to about the label vegan, was mostly because we don't want ex-vegans to be a thing, right? Because there's actually, I don't know if you have had this argument said at you, but like, well, how come so many vegans turn ex-vegan? And I usually tell them, well, they weren't vegan to begin with. They were just probably plant-based. So
I used to say that. I don't anymore. Yeah. And that's
because, you handle that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I know a number of people, like a lot more than I used to know, that are ex-vegans at this point. And many of them absolutely 100% from an outside perspective were ethical vegans. So I don't go around saying like, oh, they were never really vegan anymore, because it's like, well, then we're just making ourselves a judge. And who are like, if externally, because I'm talking about people that showed up to activism. I know people that, you know, worked in slaughterhouses, documented undercover stuff firsthand, went vegan, joined activism, wrote books about things they'd witnessed, and now are like, I'm not vegan anymore. I found God and I don't think it's wrong to eat animals. I've heard that one.
Oh my God. What?
Yeah.
Really?
And other people that I know people that I've, you know, done animal rescue stuff with, people that tabled and have done activism and led vegan organizations. Like, it's not, I don't think, and I do not think we can chalk ex-vegans up to they were never really vegan or they never got the ethics. That's a lot of the health, you know, trendy, whatever stuff out there for sure. But in my personal experience, I now know a lot of people who, by every metric, you know, we were involved in activism together. They were absolutely driven ethical vegans, not doing it for health reasons or anything else. And so I think it's also, the reality is people's views and beliefs can change. And that's what I think is happening with those people, and or it's social environments. That's where I think that social conditioning comes in. People want to be part of a tribe and a community. And I think sometimes they get tired of being different. They have friends and family that are, into something they're not. And they consciously choose to turn their back on things or be okay with something that they weren't, to fit in, to be part of some new community or, do something different. And I think that actually happens. I think there are people that really believe in animal rights and then don't.
Wow, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, it's also kind of scary to hear that. Like, I didn't know that these people liked. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a highly logical person, so for me, veganism was mostly logical, not sentimental or anything. So I feel like there isn't any logic to say veganism isn't the right choice. So I'm like, okay, how could you back that up? Like, believing in animal rights also seems kind of like a logical thing more than anything, because like claiming that, yeah, okay, it's an ethical thing, a lot of people, you could somehow have emotions involved into it, and a lot of people, emotions are passing by. They could change, or they could evolve or devolve. I don't even know how to call it, but like when it's logical, I think like, and I'm just questioning whether that this just gets me questioning whether then is it important when we teach people about veganism that we go more for the logical side of it or the emotional side of it. And by the way, I know we're already over time. I'm sorry. I just if you say interesting stuff and I keep
but I should wrap up in like 5 minutes.
We'll wrap it up.
No, it's a good question. I've also probably gone the other way. I used to be very, very logical with my approach to people and would get into long, intellectual philosophical debates. And now I've gone more the emotional route because I have kind of come to the opinion that, not just opinion, but kind of the idea that facts don't change people's behavior. Facts don't change people's minds. Like most people, there are some people who, probably like yourself, are very logical, but I think the average person, they're doing lots of illogical things. They're driven by emotion. And that's the reality of most people. And I think more often than not, from the research I've read, we seek out facts to back up our feelings and opinions, not the other way around. We don't go truly open-minded into something to research it. We go in with a bias that we want to confirm. And that's why you get all this cherry picking. That's what, nutritional stuff or all kinds of things. People are going to find the information they want to back up what they want to do. And so because of all of that, I've shifted away from these long intellectual debates and conversations more to, oh, here's a video of an animal having their throat slit. Are you sad by this right now? If you're sad, stop paying for this, and very brief, and I've found that to be more effective because I used to I think I naively thought if I had the better argument, if I won the debate, that would equal someone changing their behavior. And instead, I think I just get into these long, drawn-out intellectual debates with people that like debating and are not really open-minded. And I'd feel like I won the debate, and they never changed anything.
Fair.
So,
I guess when I said logical, I don't necessarily mean that we get into debates, but rather that we get them to understand that animals deserve to have rights logically, not just emotionally. But yeah, I get the point. And that's an interesting thing that maybe we can use the fact that people follow facts from their feelings and not the other way around to our advantage, which is a very interesting point. And I'm sorry, but I have to answer this one question because I made a donation. Well, thank you for the donation. When will you do shirtless outreach? Well, actually, next week I'll do live outreach in a tank top, not shirtless, but in a tank top. I will not probably be shirtless because, I don't know that I want to do shirtless. I would. It would be difficult also for me maybe to focus because I would be too self-aware. Nobody likes their body fully, so whatever. So there you go. Thank you for the donation, Ulf. So I have a couple of questions that I want to end the interview on, always, that I ask almost everybody.
Okay.
What is the argument against veganism that you dislike the most?
Probably the some version of the there's no ethical consumption under capitalism argument, which, basically like,
Interesting.
oh, it's the corporations, oh, one person doesn't make a difference, something along those lines. That one really irritates the hell out of me.
That's a very interesting one. Okay. Yeah, I don't get that one a lot. Do you get that one a lot?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely, and that's probably tells you about some of the places I was doing activism on a very leftist social justice college campus. Those are the types of arguments that I heard. And I find it particularly frustrating because it's like, it feels very disingenuous. It's like, I would almost rather have a conversation with someone who's going to be honest and be like, I just like the taste of meat. I'm not giving it up. And I feel like this is what happens when I debate with like lefty non-vegans. They have made their whole identity about social justice and causes. So they can't just admit that they like the taste of meat. It's like they have to come up with like, oh, well, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And, it's really the corporation's fault, not us. And I'm just like, take some personal responsibility. Like, how is anything going to change if you can't even change your own daily habits?
Yeah. It's kind of insane that I don't know. I heard this thing today about the same thing about personal responsibility, and I'm like, well, you can blame corporations, but at some point, corporations are made out of people, so there is some personal responsibility in that matter, right? It can't.
Yep.
There's no such entity as a corporation. There's no such entity as a state that works on its own. It's still people behind them, so people still have that. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay, and what is the worst logical fallacy that most carnists make? And added to that, if you could remove one logical fallacy from the face of the earth that no person ever would ever make, which one would you remove?
Oh, appeal to authority. Kind of in a similar vein. I guess that's similar vein to the not taking personal responsibility. Like, just because someone said something doesn't necessarily make it true. And wait, what were the two?
So
questions?
which one is the worst logical fallacy, and which one would you remove? And they're slightly different because, in a sense, you can believe that the logical fallacy is worse than another, and not necessarily for the whole movement, but rather maybe for discussions, for how you proceed. But you can believe that the whole logical fallacy can be really bad for the whole movement, and then thus want it to never exist or people never commit it. So that's why I asked these two questions.
I'm like suddenly blanking on the names of various logical fallacies right now.
You can describe them. That's okay. I know. I get that a lot, so that's fine. I get that.
So yeah, I'd say I find appeal to authority really annoying. But one that I would remove, maybe like the appeal to nature.
Yes, me too. That's nice.
For things being natural, like, oh, there's so much I could say about that. Like, yeah. Anyway, that's
you don't even have to explain it. I understand it. I agree with you. Appeal to nature, I would totally remove it. It's annoying as hell. But it's not just annoying, it's counterproductive to everything.
Well, and I say I have a lot it's complicated because on the one hand, like, I'm a person that many people would say, like, oh, you're into natural hippie stuff. But I don't think natural is obviously not inherently morally better. It's just complicated, and I feel like people just misuse it so much. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, and if you could pick one person in the world to be vegan, anybody in the world. It could, well, your parents are already vegan, but I guess like maybe your grandparents or whatever, or even a celebrity or someone, who would you pick?
I don't know, maybe the Dalai Lama.
Interesting. The Dalai Lama. Yeah. Can I ask why?
I feel like having spiritual leaders, especially when we're talking about peace and nonviolence, and compassion, and the Dalai Lama just is such a straight up hypocrite. Like, I just feel like that would really help set an example for spiritual people and truly bring like their actions into alignment, and like, yeah, I think someone like the Dalai Lama, I could say the Pope too, but I'm not Catholic. I don't know, but like people that I think are genuine spiritual leaders.
Yeah.
And then justifying continuing to eat animals is just such a hypocritical thing, and they reach so many people. I feel like that would be really, truly powerful.
It's a very interesting response, because I tend to agree with Mike here. As he says, I probably pick Mr. Beast, since his reach is very big and he's kind of a leader in opinion. But then what you mentioned, like spiritual leaders, is also very interesting, because spiritual leaders do kind of hold the keys to morality, or do kind of encapsulate this whole, people look to them to get with what is moral, what isn't. People who refuse to actually believe, or to refuse to think more, but they just want a simple answer. So maybe that's actually better in a way. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting what you mentioned. Yeah. And my final question is, how do you envision a vegan world? Like, how do you, like, if you can describe a vegan world, how would you describe it?
It would be a world where we recognize the personhood of the earthlings we share this planet with, and we aren't intentionally breeding and bringing them into existence to exploit and farm and kill. We aren't breeding any domesticated animals into existence. Maybe no domesticated animals exist, honestly. And then we do our best to live in harmony with our natural surroundings. We live with a mindset towards balance and preserving ecosystems and biodiversity, where we are doing our best to live in a way that works well for all communities, human and non-human.
That's a very good answer. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of also my answer. That's a very good one. Nice. I'm trying to take that in. That's a nice description. Thank you, Sarina, for being here. By the way, it's Sarina, right? It's not. I'm not pronouncing it in any wrong way.
Yeah, you're good, Sarina.
Sarina, thank you for being here. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Everybody go follow Sarina if you're not following her on Instagram, on YouTube. She has been born vegan. She has a lot of good videos, which you could also use and learn more from. Yeah, I'd like to end the segment by telling people, let me put the music, the ending music. There you go. At the volume. So, just go out there, people. Speak. Teach people about veganism. Teach them about animals. And get them to see the perspective that we need them to see. That animals are not ours to use, that they're sentient individuals, that they deserve their own autonomy. And if we all went out there and spoke to at least one person per day, I think we would be way further ahead right now. So yeah, so maybe let's make a goal for us. Go out there, speak to one person per day. Even if you don't get that person vegan, speak to one person per day. plant one seed per day. You know, it's in 365 days, you get 365 people. And that's a lot. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Sarina, for being here. By the way, I have a friend called Harini, so it's like my mind is like, thank you, Sarina, for being here. Thank you, Mike, for being a member for 2 years. I saw it. Thank you, Jan, for being a new member. Thank you, Ulf, for donating and asking me an inappropriate question. Love it. He always does this. I love Ulf. And have an awesome day. Sarina, do you want to, have I missed something? Do you want to encourage people in some ways to go and do some outreach?
Yeah, I would just say, don't forget the power you have on the people around you. We're some combination of like the 5 people we spend the most time with. And so if you turn that around and think that you're one of those 5 people for potentially multiple other people in your life, that's a really powerful way to look at your impact of living in alignment with your ethics and beliefs and showing other people that they can do the same.
That's a very nice message. And we'll end it there, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Sarina, again. And I don't know, everybody, live vegan, go vegan, and get people to be vegan. Stop it with this whole other stuff. We need the vegan world faster.